1. Okay, so this is a story about a doggy daycare I used to work at, that I believe to be somewhat haunted. Now, this isn't going to be as creepy or scary as the other stories on here, but there were quite a bit of unexplainable things that happened. I used to work at a dog daycare which also boarded dogs, meaning dogs that stay overnight while parents are on vacation or whatever. I would always work the morning shift starting at 6:30 in the morning. The morning shift only had 3 workers in the back, actually taking care and watching the dogs. The front had the managers and whatever front desk worker. Part of the shift was each person had to clean the kennel room, the room where the boarding dog stayed in. I had to wipe the floors and clean the cages of one row and then switch to my co-worker so she could do the other row. So people had equal cleaning duties. Almost every time I was in that room by myself, I couldn't help but feel like I wasn't alone. I would look over my shoulder, look around, and of course there's nothing. I would never be able to shake the feelings, so I would clean quickly as I could and got out of there. I felt like this a few times I was in that room alone. One day my co-worker asked me, while we had dogs in an outside area, if I ever felt scared in the kennel room. Thinking we were on the subject of dogs, I said, like, a fight's going to break out? No, more like you're not alone. Now, I had never told anyone at work how I felt about the kennel room, so my eyes widened and I responded with, "My God, I thought I was going crazy." Her face brightened up as she realized I knew exactly what she had meant. I told her how it felt like someone was always watching you, and she agreed she felt the same way. This was our conversation as we were walking up to the front, ready to leave for the day, when our manager asked us what we were talking about. We told her how we felt about the kennel room. She so nonchalantly says, "Oh yeah, it's haunted." My friend and I look excited and relieved ourselves as we were actually right about this. She had told us the weird things that had happened to her as well in that room, and also told us there was once a worker here who, for some reason, always had strange things happen to him. One of her stories was that she was cleaning the kennel room out when out of the corner of her eye a dog ran past the door of the room where all the boarding dogs' food is kept in their cubbies. Now, when we're cleaning the room, all the dogs are playing around in the pens. There are no dogs in this room when it comes to cleaning it. She said she knew she saw a dog because she even said out loud, "Oh fuck, what dog is in here?" She looked everywhere for the dog, but nothing. Now, prior to this story, I had been told that the daycare I used to work at once adopted a dog after the owner died, and the family didn't want it. It was a German Shepherd named Samson. He had died in the daycare from old age, after being there for years. His leash still hangs on a hook by the big dog pen. She had also told me that sometimes she'll even hear Samson's bark. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. Well, how does she know it was his bark and not another dog in the pen? Trust me, I asked this very same question. She looked me dead in the eye and responded, "Because that dog barked every fucking minute of every fucking day." Now, as someone who has worked with dogs for almost 4 years, now I can actually confirm that you do actually recognize the bark of each regular dog. I'm not saying I believe her or not, but if the dog had barked that much, it would be easy to recognize it when it sounded up again. My co-worker and I thought all of the stories were pretty awesome. After that day, though, some other weird things started to happen. We would come in the morning to start our shift, walk into the kennel room, and there would be another dog just wandering around outside of its cage. We would be all confused as to how the dog got out of its kennel. If it was a large dog, it would make sense as it can reach the handle. I've met dogs that could open kennel doors, so we would actually put a lock to keep it from happening. But most of the time it was a smaller dog that physically couldn't even reach the handle that opens the door. But they were definitely not smart enough to pull some maneuver to climb up on the door to specifically lift the handle. This happened multiple times while I worked there in the morning. It was never multiple dogs at one time, just one random dog. There were 1 or 2 times where Samson's leash would be on the ground instead of on its hook. That was always weird because no one ever touched that leash. There was no reason to ever touch it or let it off its hook. Also, even if a dog had happened to pull it off the hook, the dog was always accompanied by a co-worker who would just pick it up and put it right back on the hook. We would occasionally hear a knock that would cause all of the dogs in both pens to start barking. The knock would usually be coming from the kennel room. The last thing I remember happening before I left that place was one of the weirdest, most unexplainable things that ever happened to me. At some point in the day, we let the dogs out in the little outside area to get some fresh air and use the bathroom, to lessen the cleaning that has to be done inside. The way we would do this is the manager would let one pen out, which was usually the small dog pen first. They would be out there for about 10 minutes, and the group would be brought back in. I happened to be in the large dog pen at the time, so like normal, we let the dogs run outside. The way we brought them back in was I would go inside first to open the door leading into the pen. My manager would open the door, causing a bunch of dogs to start running down the hall in my direction. Because I hold the door open, most of the dogs would just run right back into the pen, like they should. 3 German Shepherds ran past me towards the kennel, which occasionally happens. That door from the hallway leading into the kennel room had taken a beating over the years, and needed the doorknob to be replaced, which is the norm for doggy daycares. So they pushed the door right open. No big deal, they weren't going anywhere because all the doors are locked. I'll just grab them once I make sure every other dog is in the pen. My manager came back and I told her to just wait there while I go grab the other dogs. I opened up the door and called the dogs' names. Now at least one of them should have responded and come running up to me, but nothing. I didn't even hear their footsteps. Confused, I take a step into the room, look down the hall and see one of the shepherds standing up against the door, from inside the boarding room, where the boarding dog's food and cubbies are. At first I thought, oh god, I hope they aren't tearing that room apart eating all the food. I ran up to the door and saw that all 3 dogs were just walking around the room, not touching anything, thank god. But I stood there confused as to how the fuck they even got into this room. I grabbed them and put them back into the pen. Afterward, I stood in the room trying to come up with a logical way as to how they managed to get in there. The moment they ran past me into the room, to the point where I went to get them, was only a few seconds. The door leading into the kennel was bad, but definitely not the boarding room door. I actually tried to push it open with all my might, and nothing. Tried multiple times, just throwing my body at it, and still nothing. There's no way all 3 dogs teamed up together in a matter of seconds to open that door. It wasn't one of my co-workers because the 2 of them were watching over the dogs in the pen. Even if someone from the desk had happened to be in the back at that moment, they would most definitely not let any dog into that room. In fact, they would grab them and help me bring them back into the pen. There is no reason for a dog to be in that room ever. The only way they could have been in that room is if the door was opened for them. Anyone who works in dog daycare knows that dogs are attracted to open doors like magnets. That would mean the second these dogs ran into that room, the door opened, grabbing their attentions, and causing them to dart right into that room within seconds of me going to look for them. That bothered me the whole day, and I told my co-worker about it, who was just as confused as I was. She couldn't think of any other way that could have happened. I haven't worked at that place for about 2 years now, but I still occasionally think about it, and all of the other strange events that happened. I guess Samson was just looking out for his buddies. 2. To start this story, you will have to know a little background on me. I'm a 42-year-old man married with 2 sons, and I come from a Scot-Irish family. We've always been very proud of our heritage, and St. Patrick's Day has always been a time for us to celebrate. My family would gather and do the corned beef and cabbage thing, traditional Irish music, etc. It was the night before St. Patrick's Day 2014, and I was standing at the foot of the stairs going up to the 2nd level of our home. The staircase goes up 8 stairs to the landing, and then you have to turn around to go up 8 more stairs to the 2nd floor. All the lights were off except for the light on the stairs. My oldest son, who was 2.5 at the time, was standing next to me clenching my left leg and very nervous. With my left hand, I put my hand on his head to calm him and said, "Everything is fine." I turned back to the stairs and looked up. I could now hear my youngest son, who was 7 months old at the time, and he was crying as if when he did not recognize someone. Then I saw a person making their way downstairs. It was a woman, in a long white dress with long sleeves. As the person came down, I saw they were carrying my son. Then I saw the person's face. It was my paternal grandmother. She looked just as I remembered her when she passed away. But as she came down the stairs, she was becoming younger. She got to the bottom of the stairs and I looked at her, not feeling any fear at all, and I said, "Grandma, but you've been gone for a long time now." She replied, "I know, but I had to see my great-grandson on his first St. Patrick's Day." "And then this must be a dream," I replied. She smiled and said, "Sort of." Then handed my son to me. "Ellen sends her love, and take care of your sons." She then gently put her hand on my cheek, smiled sweetly and said, "Until we meet again." At that point I gently woke up and heard my youngest son crying in his crib that same cry. I went and got him and brought him in bed with my wife and me, since I needed to be at work in a half hour. As I lay there with him, I was remembering the dream, and trying to figure out who she was talking about when she mentioned Ellen. It took me a few seconds to figure it out. Before my sons were born, my wife and I lost our first child at 8 weeks into the pregnancy. And being that early in the pregnancy, we did not know the sex of the child. If the child was to be a girl, her name was to be Ellen. I'm not sure how to interpret this. Was it a visit from my grandmother in my dream, as I hear ghosts will visit you in your dreams? Or was it just my mind helping me get some closure on my losses? Whatever it is, to my grandmother and my unborn child, until we meet again. 3. This happened just the other night. I am an 18-year-old male from Perth, Australia. Me and my 2 friends had just been to the city for a night out, and we managed to get the last train home. We pulled into our station, and all decided to walk home, as it was only about a 15 to 20 minute walk. Probably not the greatest idea, but we were drunk, so, you know. We had been walking for about 10 minutes when we were just about to cross a bridge that was built over a pond. This bridge was for cars and pedestrians. When we heard a man laugh strangely loud, we all looked up at the direction the sound was coming from. And there was a man just standing in the middle of the bridge on the road. I couldn't make out any details as it was dark and the bridge isn't lit. We all looked at each other and said, "Fuck that." A guy standing on the bridge laughing at 3:30 in the morning? Obviously it doesn't have good intentions, so we took a detour and took the long way around, which had us walk through the park. We were a bit weirded out, so we kept an eye out, but it was too dark to see anything, when all of a sudden the man screamed and made an inhumane noise. We all just ran across the dark park, not even taking a glance back. We ran for a few minutes till we were away from the park, and made it home safe without another incident. So random guy standing on the bridge at 3:30 a.m. Let's not meet again. 4. I've always experienced some sort of glitches in the Matrix and paranormal activities. Odd events I have never had a name for. My earliest memory of such weirdness occurred when I was 9-ish. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I remember asking my mother if our lives were real and not some kind of pretend, to which my mother replied, "Don't be stupid." "Thanks, Mom. Lesson learned, keep it to myself." These events continued so often, such as doppelgangers, shadow people, and strange voices. My brothers nicknamed me a witch. I often ignore anything weird, but there are a few I cannot ignore. One of the most recent events occurred when I made a trip to my bank. The bank is popular but small. You can either wait for a teller or you can sign in for a personal banker. I always sign in for the personal banker. I arrived at 8 a.m. and signed, waited for my personal banker named Tammy. It was a long wait, 30 minutes, but I was in no rush to go to work. I spoke to the guard, the other tellers, and drank coffee. When my turn came up, we chatted about work, vacation, gossiped about co-workers, and people Tammy met on the cruise she recently came back from. This is the norm. Afterwards, I made a large deposit. We ordered a new debit card and ATM card. Before I left, I made a last withdrawal, and even have a receipt. Like I said, I was in no rush to get to work. I hate my job, but love my boss. The following day, I get an email regarding my account being in the negative. I assumed it takes 24 hours for the check to be processed, and think nothing of it. I get another email the following day. I'm a bit at a loss, so I called the bank to stop the emails and fees. So I go over my issues with Tammy. This is where it gets weird. Tammy tells me I was never at the bank. I assume she confused me with someone else, which was odd, since we always have long conversations, but she was insisting I was not there. She checked the sign-in logs. Nothing was there. She looked through the system for my deposit and request for new cards. Found nothing there. Tammy was at a loss regarding me being able to recall our conversation, which, according to her, never happened. I still had the receipt for the withdrawal. Thankfully, the deposit was displayed as well. After providing the receipt with the time and date displayed, I was given a credit for the amount and my bank was correctly updated. I am not sure what the hell happened, and just accepted it as some random hole in the matrix. 5. My son has an interesting relationship with the paranormal, forest entities and wild animals, fairy folk, and UFOs. Too many stories for me to go into here. He had a missing time episode with a friend when they were both in their teens. My son is now nearly 41. Their experience had nothing to do with a UFO sighting, so we don't know what happened. What follows is the story. My son was living with his father in a small community nestled in the coastal dunes of Northern California. The houses of this hamlet cluster along one road which runs through the area, and which connects to the two major towns there. All along the road and throughout the dunes are small woodlands, dwarfed forests, many of which are actually public reserves and rec areas. My son and his friends used to roam freely in these little woodlands, and he came to know most of them fairly well. These woodlands are thickest in the hollows between the dunes, and though nearby to civilization, they are quite isolated in their way, and they're all characterized by dense undergrowth, moisture, and shade, some being quite dark and forbidding even on a sunny day. The woodland reserves are undeveloped for the most part, so there are almost no trails, formal or otherwise. Thus, much of my son's wanderings were bushwhacking adventures into seldom visited hollows, where he would discover magical little worlds of mosses, ferns, dwarf trees, and wildlife secrets. He visited one hollow not too deeply, only a handful of times. One sunny afternoon, he decided to share the adventure of a deeper exploration with his friend Don. The only trail in was a half-hidden, informal one that my son had carefully wrought from a deer track through the bush during his prior visits. He is very good at making trails for himself that only he can find. He does this purposefully, in order to discourage others, knowing that tons of traffic would ruin the little woods that he loved and felt responsible for protecting. However, he thought that he could trust Don, so brought him to this little wood that he himself had scarcely explored. He had always felt timid about going too far into this hollow. For some reason, unlike the scores of others he had been to, this one seemed darker, too quiet, less welcoming, and he never went much beyond a small clearing with a swampy little rivulet that cut across it. Now, mind you, there is really no way to get lost in these little woodlands. The dune system and its little forests comprise a narrow strip between the main road and the ocean's broad beaches, and there are access points to both all along this strip of land. It wasn't a feeling of getting lost that kept him from going too deep into this wood. It was an eerie feeling that something wasn't quite right about it. With his friend Don as company, he felt a little braver. So the two of them set out on an early summer afternoon, determined to explore this dune hollow forest once and for all. Dawn had to be back home by 6 p.m., so luckily the hollow was only a 15 or 20-minute walk away, leaving plenty of time for exploring. My son located the entrance to the trail easily, and they made their way through, sometimes on hands and knees to avoid disturbing the brush, until they reached the point where the trail ended at the rivulet in the clearing. My son, telling me this story, then said, "The next thing I knew, we were on the other side of the creek and the sun was almost set, and we couldn't see the trail ahead." He asked Don what had happened, but his friend looked really frightened and only shook his head. Then they walked up and down along the rivulet, looking for the trailhead, which my son should have recognized easily. Several minutes passed. Don was getting ever more anxious about being lost in these woods and getting home late, for he was sure to be severely punished. My son started to get really scared for the first time. Such fear is unusual for him, for he always felt comfortable in the woods. It was an unreasoning fear as well, for he knew that he would only have to bushwhack his way in a straight line, either west or east, to get out. For some reason it did not occur to him to do this. Then, after they frantically passed by the same point several times, suddenly the trailhead was plainly visible, even in the failing light. My son described it as appearing out of nowhere. They got on the trail and headed home as quickly as they could. Though my son did not know the exact time when they left for their hike, he does know that it was mid-afternoon. The sun was still high in the sky, so he figured it couldn't have been much past 3 or 4 p.m. It was past 7 and dark when they got home to an angry father who had kept dinner waiting for over an hour. He has no idea to this day what happened to the 2 hours or more that must have elapsed between the time he and Don emerged from the trail upon arrival, to suddenly finding themselves on the opposite side of the rivulet, several yards down from the trailhead. Don does not know what happened either, and was so freaked out, he would never speak of the incident again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Scary Subscriber Stories, episode 59. I don't know if you could hear it when I was doing that story about the doggy daycare, but the neighborhood dogs were barking. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to keep recording, because if it shows up, it's added ambience and it's actually quite appropriate for the story. So if you hear dogs whiffing, it wasn't deliberate, it was accidental, but I decided to make the best of it. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.